Most people think once you enter a nursing home, that's it. End of the road. Your life becomes someone else's schedule, someone else's rules, and someone else's version of care. But what if that wasn't the end? This is the story of one woman who refused to let a sterile hallway and a shared meal schedule define the rest of her life. At 80 years old, she did what most people half her age are too afraid to do. She left. Not in a rush of rebellion, not with anger, but with quiet courage and a plan. Her journey wasn't easy. She had no perfect family waiting with open arms, no big bank account, no promise that things would be better. But she had one thing many people in her situation forget: they still have a choice. In this video, we'll walk through her story, the breaking point, the escape, the rebirth of her independence, and the unexpected peace she found on the other side. It's not just inspiring, it's a reminder that aging doesn't mean surrendering who you are. And if you or someone you love feels stuck in the wrong place, her story might just be the light you need. The life she thought was over. At 79, Margaret sat by the window of her shared nursing home room, watching the same parking lot, the same trees, the same routine pass her by. Every day felt like a repeat. Meals arrived on schedule, medication at exact hours, lights out by 9. And despite the staff's politeness and professionalism, she felt like a ghost in her own life. Her family meant well. After a fall and a brief hospital stay, they thought the nursing home was the safest option. They assured her it was temporary, just until she got stronger. But months passed, then a year, and the only thing growing was her loneliness. No one asked if she wanted her favorite chair from home. No one cared that she missed late-night radio or the smell of her backyard herbs. The aides changed weekly, each kind but distant. Her dignity eroded in tiny, quiet ways, being called "dear" instead of Margaret, being helped with tasks she could still do, having no say in what to eat for dinner. One afternoon, a nurse found her weeping, not from pain, but from the crushing realization that she had stopped being seen, not as a patient, but as a person. That was the moment everything changed. Margaret didn't know how she'd leave, but she knew she had to. She was still alive, and somewhere deep inside, she believed her life wasn't over. Not yet. What finally broke her? It wasn't a dramatic event, no fight, no medical mistake. It was something much quieter, more devastating because of how ordinary it was. Margaret's 80th birthday came and went, with barely a whisper. No cake, no call from her daughter, who had promised to visit but got too busy with work. The staff had a chart noting her birth date, but no one acknowledged it. Her roommate was asleep most of the day. Dinner was meatloaf again. The only card she got was from the nursing home administrator, a printed template with her name scribbled in pen. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the buzz of fluorescent lights and distant televisions, something snapped inside her, not in anger, but in clarity. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't recovery. This was her life now. And it wasn't life at all. She remembered how it felt to bake muffins in her kitchen, just because she wanted to walk barefoot in the grass, to fall asleep watching her favorite old films, to host tea for neighbors. All of it had slowly been replaced by charts, routines, and fluorescent silence. What broke her wasn't just the loneliness. It was the quiet realization that she had become institutionalized without even noticing it. That no one really saw her anymore. That in this place, her needs would always be met, but her spirit might never be fed again. She whispered to herself that night, barely audible, "I need to get out." It was the beginning of her escape, not a physical one just yet, but a mental rebellion. The moment she remembered, she still had choices. Even at 80, the quiet plan to leave. Margaret didn't throw a fit or announce her decision in dramatic fashion. She knew that wouldn't work. She'd seen others complain, threaten to leave, even beg for something different, only to be told it was too dangerous, too complicated, too late. So she stayed silent, but watchful, and she started planning. She borrowed an old iPad from the activities room and began looking up resources, senior housing alternatives, subsidized apartments, community transportation services. She made a list, handwritten, tucked into her Bible, of everything she would need to live on her own. A place with a small kitchen, a safe shower, somewhere quiet but not lonely. She had no spouse. Her children were distant, emotionally and physically. One sent money occasionally. The other hadn't spoken to her since she entered the facility. She was on her own. That truth might have crushed her, but it also gave her freedom. Margaret began reaching out to old friends, people she hadn't spoken to in years. She called her cousin in Oregon, left a voicemail for a neighbor she used to knit with, even sent a letter to her childhood best friend, unsure if the address was still good. Some responded, some didn't. But the spark of connection reminded her that she wasn't invisible. She started saving what little money she could, declined extra charges for services she didn't use, asked subtle questions about discharge protocols, listened carefully when residents talked about someone who had left and moved into senior apartments with a kitchenette. It wasn't easy. It was slow, quiet, lonely work. But it gave her something the nursing home never had: hope, and the courage to say to herself, "I'm not done yet." Margaret didn't have a rescue team. She became her own, finding a place to call her own. Margaret didn't need much. In fact, after years in a nursing home where even her dresser drawers didn't feel like hers, she craved less. When she found a listing for a modest, senior-friendly apartment complex just outside town, she knew it was right, even before stepping inside. No concierge, no grand piano in the lobby. But it had something rarer: silence, sunlight, and space to breathe. The unit was a tiny studio, one room, a kitchenette, a bathroom with safety rails, and a little porch facing a tree-lined path. It was nothing fancy. The carpet was dated, the appliances weren't new, and the cabinets squeaked. But it was hers. She moved in with 2 suitcases, a donated armchair, and the quilt her grandmother had stitched in 1947. Gone were the plastic trays of pre-portioned food. Now, she cooked oatmeal in a real pot. She sat by the window with tea. She heard birds instead of buzzers. Her name wasn't printed on a dry erase board anymore. It was on the mailbox. Outside, there were walking trails, a community garden, a small library where other seniors sometimes gathered for book club or just to sit in quiet company. No one made her participate. No one scheduled her day. This wasn't just a new address. It was a reclamation. Margaret didn't miss the glossy brochures or the endless monitoring. What she had now was a small place where her story continued on her terms. The chipped teacup on her shelf meant more than any generic recreation schedule. Freedom didn't look like luxury. It looked like choice, like waking up without a schedule taped to the wall, like being alone, not lonely. For the first time in years, Margaret closed her door and didn't feel trapped. She felt safe. She felt home, building her life back. One small joy at a time. The first morning in her new home, Margaret made tea, real tea, boiled on a stovetop, not poured from an industrial dispenser. She held the mug with both hands and stood at her window, watching the light shift through the leaves. No nurse knocking, no routine, just stillness. That moment broke something open inside her, a kind of quiet rebirth. She began to rediscover her rhythm, slowly, gently. There was no pressure to perform, no one checking off boxes beside her name. She cooked her favorite meals in half portions, sometimes just soup and toast. But it was hers, and that made it taste better. She ventured outside each day, even if just for a few steps. The breeze on her face felt like an old friend. Once, she sat on a park bench for an hour doing nothing. And for the first time in years, it felt like she was doing something meaningful. She joined the library's weekly book circle, not to speak, but to listen. To be surrounded by voices that weren't raised or rushed. Sometimes she brought cookies. Sometimes she didn't go, but she knew she could. That mattered more. Music became part of her healing. She played old records when she missed her sister, or jazz when she was cooking. Silence became a choice, not a symptom. She started journaling again, something she hadn't done since her 50s. The pages weren't filled with deep reflections, just lists of things that made her smile. A friendly neighbor, a bird that returned to her windowsill, the way the sunlight stretched across her floor in the late afternoon. This wasn't a glamorous comeback. There were no viral videos, no grand declarations. Just a woman quietly stitching a life back together, thread by humble thread. Because in the end, it wasn't about escaping a nursing home. It was about returning to herself, how she found real peace, and a new purpose. Peace didn't arrive like a miracle. It settled slowly, like the way dusk filters into a quiet room. It wasn't about perfect health or a dream lifestyle. For Margaret, peace came from having the freedom to shape her own days. One day, she passed a flyer for a local knitting group pinned to the bulletin board at the library. She hadn't touched her needles in years, but something nudged her to go. The group met every Thursday, just 6 women gathered around a big wooden table. They talked about everything and nothing. She felt seen, not as someone old or fragile, but as a woman with stories in her hands. That one simple act opened a new chapter. Margaret began writing again. Not full novels, just short stories. Snapshots of a girl who once danced in red shoes or a mother who held her family together through silence. They weren't meant for anyone at first, but she started sharing them online in a small blog. To her surprise, younger women began reading, commenting, asking questions. How did you stay strong when your husband left? What did you do when your children moved away? Her inbox filled, not with sympathy, but with curiosity, admiration, connection. For the first time in years, Margaret didn't just feel alive, she felt useful. That purpose became her peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of something meaningful, something chosen. She still had hard days. Her knees ached. Some mornings came with heavy memories. But she had something now that no facility ever gave her. A reason to wake up, a place to belong, and a self she could return to again and again. What she lost and doesn't miss. Margaret did lose things when she left the nursing home. Predictability, for one. No one reminded her to take her vitamins. No one wheeled in a tray of food at the same time every day. There were no staff members checking on her every hour, no structured activity blocks or safety rails on every wall. It was quieter, less padded, more vulnerable, but she doesn't miss it. She doesn't miss asking permission to go outside, or being told her walk was too far. She doesn't miss the silence that filled the dining hall, where everyone sat together, but no one really talked. She doesn't miss being called dear or sweetheart by people who didn't know her name last week. Most of all, she doesn't miss feeling like she was just waiting for medication, for someone to visit, for life to pass. Now, her meals aren't scheduled, but they're hers. She might skip lunch and bake cookies instead. She forgets vitamins sometimes, but remembers the smell of cinnamon and butter on her fingers. That trade feels worth it. She knows it's not for everyone. She doesn't pretend her path is easy. There are moments when the absence of structure feels like free fall, but it's her free fall. Margaret let go of a cage disguised as care, and what she found in its place was a little messier, a little less certain, and a whole lot more alive. Her message to anyone who feels trapped. Margaret doesn't think of herself as brave. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She just couldn't bear to live the rest of her life as a ghost in a hallway lined with locked med cabinets and polite silences. Her message is simple. You're not too old to choose peace. She knows that not everyone can, or should, leave a nursing home. For some, the care is vital. The routine is comforting. But for those who feel more like residents than people, for those who feel overlooked, muted, and invisible, there may still be a door open. You're not too old to start again. You're not too fragile to find purpose. You're not too late to want something more. Margaret speaks softly, but her words land hard. Even at 80, I deserve to feel human. Not managed, not stored. Alive. Her story isn't about rebellion. It's about reclaiming the final chapters of life with dignity. She doesn't chase wild dreams or make grand statements. She tends to her plants. She calls her friends. She writes. And when she wakes up each morning, there's no beeping card in the hallway, no checklist on her nightstand. Just sunlight on her windowsill and the quiet joy of being free. That, she says, is more than enough. Margaret's story isn't just one woman's quiet escape. It's a reminder that even in our later years, choice matters. Autonomy matters. Peace is not a luxury reserved for the young. It's a right we all carry, no matter our age. If you or someone you love feels stuck in a situation that no longer brings dignity or joy, don't ignore that feeling. Ask questions. Explore options. Talk to others who've made the change. You don't have to settle for survival when a meaningful life is still possible. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it with someone who may need to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life insights that honor the voices and choices of seniors everywhere. Because every chapter counts, especially the last ones.